So we left off talking about the phases of mitosis. And what we want to do in this video is kind of talk about what happens when a cell has reached the end of its life, when it needs to die, or when mitosis goes wrong. So those are the two topics for today's video. First, what does a cell need to do when it's ready to die? Apoptosis is what we call controlled cell death or controlled cell suicide. Controlled cell death or apoptosis is where a feedback loop inside the body, remember those feedback loops from homeostasis, controls how a cell disintegrates. This is not the only way for a cell to die. It can get infected, or it could explode, or any number of things could happen to it to cause it to die. But this is what a cell's preferred form of death is. And so we're going to kind of walk through what happens here. So in the body, you are constantly producing a signal that tells old cells to die, to go through apoptosis. And young cells, cells that are still functioning the way they should, are producing a chemical response that says, no, we're okay, we're still healthy, we don't need to die yet. But once a cell gets older, it's not able to make that signal that says, no, we're okay, we don't need to die. Once it gets to that point where it's too old to make that we're okay signal, it's going to go through apoptosis. So the first thing that's going to happen is that the cytoskeleton inside of the cell is going to collapse. It's actually going to start breaking down. And then the cell membrane is going to because there's no support structure anymore, it's going to start collapsing in. And as it does that, it pinches off, forming what we call apoptotic bodies, but those are really just like bubbles of cell parts that can then be absorbed by the surrounding cells and reused and recycled for their own purposes. This is kind of one way that cells can grow and get bigger in order to go through mitosis later, because if a cell has died, you might need a cell to fill its place. And so a cell might go through mitosis in order to fill that gap left by a cell that's gone through apoptosis. Okay, so on the other side, what happens when a cell refuses to die and will not stop going through division? That's the disease we call cancer. Cancer is just uncontrolled cell division. We talked about how in the cell cycle, G2 has a whole bunch of checkpoints to stop cells that aren't well prepared for cell division to go through mitosis. Cancer cells ignore those checkpoints. That means any mistakes in the DNA go unchecked, the cells aren't the right size to support themselves, or they're too big, or they're mal-shaped. Lots of problems. These are not healthy cells. So the other thing is these cells don't respond to apoptosis signals. They ignore the signals from the body for old and unhealthy cells to die. They just straight up ignore those and continue dividing. So let's talk a little bit about the two types of cancerous tumors that we see. First, we see benign tumors. These are cells that are dividing rapidly but are not really cancer. Their division is abnormal, but they're not dangerous. They can turn into dangerous cancers, what we call malignant, but at this point, they are not dangerous. An example would be something like a mole on someone's skin. That is an example of a benign tumor. Not something that needs to be removed necessarily. It's just that the cells divided irregularly. Malignant, on the other hand, are cells that are dividing rapidly and are cancerous and dangerous. Malignant tumors can do a process we call metastasis. And metastasis is a process where cancerous or malignant tumors will break off cells, and those cells will travel through the body and they'll implant in other regions of the body and form tumors there. So one of the things that you might hear about is like someone had lung cancer that had migrated to the brain. That's because metastasis had occurred. They had lung cancer, they had tumors in their lungs, but cells from those lungs broke off, went through the bloodstream, migrated to the brain, and implanted there and started developing tumors there. And that's what metastasis is. So here you can kind of see what benign growth looks like. You can kind of see the abnormal cells. Some of them are slightly misshapen, and they're more clustered together because they've divided more rapidly than they should have. But generally, they're still functioning. Malignant, everything they're doing is about division. All they want to do is keep dividing. And so this is where you start to see cells that are really malformed, not carrying out their normal functions, impeding other cells from doing their functions. And this is what makes malignant tumors so dangerous. So what causes cancer? Now, all cancers are genetic because they're all related to how your genes are controlling the cell's division. But there are contributing factors that can be from other areas. Things like the environment. Radiation, like UV radiation or UV exposure, can cause skin cancer. Chemicals can cause cancer to develop. Things like nicotine and tars from smoking can cause lung cancer and throat cancer and mouth cancer and all sorts of different things. We also know of other things like formaldehyde that are chemicals that can cause cancer. But of course, there's also just a hereditary component where some genes just make you predisposed to develop certain types of cancers. BRCA1 is a gene that we know can increase a woman's chances to have breast cancer. And while some genes that are linked to breast cancer can only be passed down from mother to daughter, there are also genes that can be passed from father to daughter from his mother. So you can still have genes from both parents that contribute to this problem. Okay, so that is going to be the last of the things that we're going to talk about in this video. We will have more things to discuss in class as well.